hits it high. He hits it deep. It is out of here. And we are going home.
Little highlight from last night's San Francisco Giants game. Pablo Sandoval, 2-run homer, walk-off home run, bottom of the 10th inning. Giants win. He hits it high. He hits it deep. It's out of here. That is the best home run call in all of baseball. Anyway, I thought you would enjoy that, whether you are a Giant fan or not. I just get goosebumps. That's the 6th time I've heard that, and I get goosebumps every time I do it. Let's go back to the phones, 888-589-8840. Let's go to Ray, Tampa, Florida. We can bring Ray in. Ray, what's on your mind?
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
God bless you, man, and the work you're doing. You're exposing so much evil, man. I try to turn my conservative friends on to your program, and some people can't get it, but I'm a voice out there crying, okay?
Great. Well, thank you very much for that.
But listen, what I want to share with you very briefly, and I'm going to focus on just one thing, and that's our citizen, the pastor in Iran that's being held captive. I'm a great believer in prayer, and I believe Benghazi was brought to the front partly because of my prayers, okay, brought back to the president. But the Lord's shown me when I've been praying for Khomeini, that spiritual leader, and Ahmadinejad, to feel the pain in their bodies that the pastor is feeling when he's being tortured. And then on top of that, the Lord's been showing me to take that to Kerry as well, and even have blood vessels start to break under his skin to show, to bring attention. You know what I'm saying? I mean, people don't understand the request, so sometimes God has to be harsh on people. But that's how God's been leading me to pray, so I'm going to continue to pray that, and I pray, God, this man is released.
All right, Ray, well, listen, and it's interesting. That's going to sound kind of harsh, what Ray was just talking about, but you ought to read through the Psalms sometime and see how David prays about his enemies. Now, Ray's not saying, look, I'm going to go over and do this myself. I'm going to go over there and stick bamboo sticks under their fingernails. He's not saying I'm going to do that. He's trusting all of that, the execution of justice. He is entrusting that to God, and what he's asking for is justice. What he's asking God for is that the treatment that these people have dished out to others, that they would receive that in return. You know how sometimes when you're disciplining your kids and one of them is being mean or unkind or whatever to the other one, sometimes you do to that child exactly what they were doing to their siblings so they can know what it feels like. And sometimes when somebody does something just really absolutely mean to you and hurtful and painful and inexcusable, there's some part of you, the just part of you, that says, I hope they experience that someday. I hope something happens to them someday where they can feel what it's like to have done to them what they have just done to me. So Ray said, look, I'm going to trust that to God. That's up to God. And the psalmist frequently, one of the more frequent verses that you find in the Psalms, these so-called imprecatory Psalms, where the psalmist is praying for God's judgment to fall upon his enemies, for God's discipline to fall upon them. He says, may the evil that they intended against me recoil on their own heads. So the psalmist is saying, look, I just want justice here. I just want what's fair. I just want, and the biblical standard is the punishment is to fit the crime. That's what life for life is all about. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, limb for limb, wound for wound, bruise for bruise, life for life. That justice is that the punishment is to fit the crime, and that's God's standard of justice, and that's all Ray is asking for. He wants justice to be done. Those that have mistreated others, that have treated others brutally and cruelly, that they themselves, under God's economy, would begin to receive the same kind of treatment that they have unjustly and cruelly dished out to others. Let's go to Lee in Dallas, Texas. Lee, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind?
Well, I heard a woman earlier talking about this, and I'm glad she brought it up, but I want to highlight it again. The fact that the guy who did all that shooting at Fort Hood is still receiving a very hefty salary. I think it's $278,000.
Yeah, he's been paid $278,000 since he shot those people down in cold blood in the name of Allah.
Yes, and that's because the Justice Department and this administration refuses to label that as a terrorist act, and so all the victims, they're not receiving anything, and that's another reason why we need to just enumerate these crimes that Eric Holder has committed against the American people. That's what it amounts to. That and what you mentioned earlier, supporting, not condemning the Black Panthers for what they did at the polls, intimidating people, and lots of other things that I've read about. And we need to urge our senators to get with it and start doing something about these things. That's what we elected them for. We're paying their salaries. They're in Washington doing nothing, most of them. I don't know whether they are intimidated by this Obama administration. Maybe we should ask them that when we call. Are you afraid of Obama? Are you afraid that he will come down on you? Is that why you're doing nothing? Because they're letting these things go, things I never thought would happen in this country.
Well, and I think that's why, we have to understand, Lee, is that elections are so critically important, because what we are being forced here to live with are the consequences of the 2012 election. The American people put Barack Obama back in the White House, so now we're stuck with him for another 3.5 years.
Or maybe not, if we can go forward with the Benghazi investigation, the IRS investigation. What has already come forth, and there's more if they will continue with it. Watergate look like a child's tea party. If they're not going to do something to bring down some prosecutions against a lot of people, and I think it probably should include Obama himself, I know Eric Holder and others, then why did they ever do what was done to Nixon during his administration? Why was he forced to resign?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's because I think the deal with Nixon is you had this complete dogpile by the media. I mean, the media were after Nixon from Jump Street. So you had this complete pile on, and there was so much pressure put on people in Congress to do something about this by the media that they eventually succumbed. And I don't know, you'd have to have the same thing happen here. I mean, the media is turning on Obama with regard to this AP thing. They've really been out of shape about the administration going after reporters. They're not happy about that at all. I think the Benghazi thing, they've sort of already put that in the rearview mirror. I think the IRS thing, that's an ongoing thing. They're not going to be able to really get rid of that. I'll play the soundbite of what happened this morning. They're not going to be able to get rid of that. That's not going to go away. But you'd have to get the media. You'd have to get the Washington Posts and the New York Timeses and the LA Timeses and the ABCs and the NBCs and the CBSs. They would all have to be united in full-throated cry before I think we would see anything happen, because, in part, they're just limitations, Lee, because Republicans do not control the Senate. I mean, there are things that can be done on the House side, but the Republicans simply do not control the Senate. And you think about the fact that, one last comment, Lee, before I let you go, but you think about the fact that when somebody does something wrong, when somebody violates a federal law, whose responsibility is it to prosecute, investigate, and prosecute? It's the Department of Justice. That's Eric Holder. So he's completely compromised. It's the Department of Injustice, and President Obama appointed him. He was confirmed by the Senate. So he's there until either President Obama wants to relieve him or he quits, and that ain't going to happen. He's a black attorney general. There's no way in the world anybody tries to go after him, it's going to be racism from the beginning. And so, I do think that prayer is our ultimate weapon in this case. We had an earlier caller talking about how he was praying, and, God can do it. I think back to what we talked about at the top of the hour. This is what God says to Ezekiel, talking about the shepherds who are politicians. Behold, God says, I am against the shepherds, and I will require my sheep at their hand and put a stop to their feeding the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouth. So God says, look, I'm looking out for my sheep, and I have the power to bring their shepherding role to a screeching halt. And in the case of Israel, he said, I am going to do it. So that may be ultimately our hope. What the Republicans won't do, what Congress won't do, God can do. Thank you, Lee. I appreciate the call. Let's go to Jim in Chester, South Carolina. Jim, oh, no, I'm sorry. Let's go to David in Albany, Georgia. David, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind?
Well, thank you for having me on, Brian. I was listening to the AFR this morning, and I heard about the $278,000 that I'm not even going to mention his name is getting sitting in prison.
Isn't that something?
That just infuriates me to no end. I'm out here busting my back. I don't make anywhere near $90,000 a year. And
you know, in the reality, too, what makes it even worse, Dave, he didn't have to do anything for it. He just sits in a jail cell collecting $278,000, getting fed 3 times a day.
I know, and if it was workplace violence and he's still in the military, then why is he allowed to wear the beard and practice his Muslim faith however he sees fit and still collect the money? If he's a part of the military, he has to conform to the military standards.
Well, you know, and that's exactly the complaint that we've had, David. I mean, that facial hair, that beard is forbidden by the military code. He's still in the military. I mean, he's in the brig, so to speak, but he hasn't even been tried. He hasn't been convicted. He's still active military, which is why he's collecting $278,000. And they are allowing him to completely, flagrantly disregard military standards, and they're not doing a thing about it. I mean, if you can't strap that guy down and shave his beard, how in the world are you going to find a way to prosecute him and try him and convict him? Well, that's it for the first hour. Focal Point AFR Talk. We'll be right back with more. Stay with us.